Welcome to Hypothetical Bay. My name is Ben Nib, and I'll be showing you a handful of features from this bay, both natural and man-made. This is a rocky headland. These provide shelter for many small animals, such as a blue-ringed octopus in their rock pools. Here we have some foreshore sand. This is habitat to pippies, ghost crabs, beach worms, and other bottom-dwelling organisms. Mangroves are a nursery for many small marine animals. Surprisingly, they also act as a host to land animals. Moving up from the mangrove, we can see that rivers are an important part of the bay, as they provide refuge for juvenile marine animals. Islands provide a large area for a lot of animals to live in, while having only a small landmass. We can see here a reef. Reefs provide habitat, shelter, and a hunting ground for many animal species. Moving on now to man-made features of Hypothetical Bay. Behind me we can see a shipwreck. Shipwrecks provide area for recruitment for coral, therefore an artificial reef, and a home for many marine animals. Another man-made feature of Hypothetical Bay is a navigation beacon. These allow sailors to navigate the waters. Hypothetical Bay is well known for its jetty. Jetties allow a place for boats to berth and for anglers to fish. Here we have a lighthouse. Lighthouses warn mariners of shoals. Here we can see a bridge. A bridge allows safe and dry passage over a waterway. Here we can see a retaining wall. These reduce erosion or shape a beach in a desired manner. Here is an airport and a highway. Both contribute to accelerated runoff into the bay. Here we have a bend in the river. The current will flow faster along the outer side of the bend. This is where erosion will occur. We are going to measure aspects of both sides of the river bend. Here I'm going to see how far I can push this standard stick into the eroding side of the bank. We have here a reading of 13 centimeters. For scientific accuracy, I will do this experiment 3 times. My next measure is 12 centimeters, and my third measure is 10 centimeters. We are on the eroding side, and I'm going to take 3 samples. These samples are going to be used in subsequent laboratory experiments. I'm going to go over to the accreting side to take measures there. We can see here that the sand on the creating side of the river is much muddier than on the eroding side. Here I'm about to conduct the same experiment that I did on the eroding side, but on the creating side this time. As we can see here, the stick goes much further down into the mud on the accreting side than on the eroding side. The first measurement for the accreting side of the bank was 105 centimeters. Second measurement was 112 centimeters. And my third measurement for the accreting bank was 85 centimeters. Now going to collect 3 samples from each side of the bank with this standard measuring device. Now that we've got our 3 samples, we're going to take a scenic tour of the river to see the amount of trees that have fallen on each side of the bend. We're going to have a look at how many trees have fallen on each side of the bank using a standard unit of measurement. Eroding 1. Eroding 2. Eroding 3. Eroding 4. Eroding 5. Eroding 7. Just going to turn around and count the amount of fallen trees on the accreting side. We will use the same length of river bend to do this. Accreting 1, accreting 2, and accreting 3. Here we have an experiment devised to show the relative particle size from both accreting and eroding sides of the river. There are many ways to estimate the relative particle size. Okay, I'm going to add a standard amount of sand to these standard amounts of water. These will be stirred for 30 seconds, then left between 1 hour and 4 days to settle. Here we're mixing the samples that were collected earlier at the river. We're going to later see how much light penetrates through these samples, indicating the relative size of particle mass that is left in suspension. This is valid because larger particles will settle more quickly than smaller ones. This will be done using a zirconometer, which will flash a beam of light, and then we will measure how far away we can see the light reflected on a white piece of paper. Now it's come time to determine the relative particle size from the accreting and eroding sides of the river. We're going to use an indirect measure to assess the relative particle size. We are going to time how long it takes for the particles to come out of solution. It's now 12 hours since we've started the experiment, and we can already see that some of the particles from the eroding side have started to settle, while the samples from the accreting side haven't. We're going to use a relative measure to determine the rate at which particles come out of suspension. So here we're using the zirconometer to measure how far away we can see a beam of light reflected on a white piece of paper. This beam of light is passing through the samples which have been stirred and left to sit for 24 hours. First off, we have the control, which had a very low reading of particles in suspension. This is reflected by a very long distance from which the light can be seen on the paper. Next we have the eroding side. This side had larger particle size, which weren't as fine as on the accreting. This meant that the particles settled a lot more quickly on this side of the river. This is reflected by a long distance from which the light can be seen reflected on the piece of paper, but it's not quite as long as the control. Finally, we have the accreting side of the river. This has a very short distance of which light travels through the sample. This means that the sand on this side of the river is very fine and has very fine particles. These will settle slowly, and therefore the light cannot pass through the samples as easily. In summary, the particle size as associated by relative turbidity is up to 4 times smaller in accreting samples. This is because the energy from the river brings the smaller particles and lays them on top of the accreting side of the river, therefore it accretes. On the other side of the river we have the eroding side. Energy from the river takes away sand from this side of the river, leaving only the coarsest and largest sand granules left on the eroding side of the river. Here we can see some limitations of the experiment. We've got 4 sets of data here. We've got the stick and how far we could penetrate that into the sand. We've got the beach profile angles, and we've got the number of trees that have fallen on either side of the river. We've got the relative clarity of our samples after a period of time of settlement. So what do you think links all of these results together? What links all of these data together, in one word, is the energy. On the eroding bank we have high energy currents. These take away trees. These produce coarse sand granules which are hard to penetrate. They take away the fine sand particles, leaving the coarse ones behind. They make the beach profile much steeper. Because the energy has removed the fine sand particles, the water is clearer in these areas. The converse applies for the low energy or accreting side of the river. All of the results above show a similar trend, and that is that we've got high energy water and currents coming around the eroding side of the river and taking away sediment from there, while the low energy side of the river, the accreting side, is allowing small particles to come out of suspension and accumulate or accrete on the accreting side of the river. These trends indicate that the accreting side of the river has less energy in currents and water flow than on the eroding side of the river. Local, state and federal governments are all currently debating what to do with the 1,500 people coming into southeast Queensland every week. People are coming in from the south of Australia, from Hobart, from Melbourne and from Sydney up to Queensland. Visitors and potential residents love coming to the Sunshine Coast because of its large biodiversity, that is, the variety of plants and animals, as well as its pristine beaches and rural scenery. There is a large variety of housing opportunities, anywhere from rural farms to high-density housing estates. This appeals to a large spectrum of people. Fortunately, governments have been thinking long and hard about how to absorb these people, and here's their report. It is called the South East Regional Plan. The key recommendation of this report is that we settle people into areas that have already been developed, rather than make new settlements. So what does this mean for the Sunshine Coast? It means that we're going to be settling people between Caloundra and Maroochydore, not in between Maroochydore and Noosa or Maroochydore and the hinterland. By doing this, the plan hopes to protect the identity of our small hinterland townships. The plan also hopes to protect the separate identities of Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast. It will do this by providing a development gap between them. Planners think that it's cheaper to provide services such as sewerage to high-density development as opposed to rural development. One of the advantages to high-density living is that we can have great facilities. By protecting the rural hinterland, this plan will protect the natural beauty of the Sunshine Coast. So the government doesn't want people to settle in the cane farms. The cane farms are no longer producing cane. So what do we do with the cane farms? If the people are going to be living in high density areas, we can let the cane fields revert back into nature. Over the next couple of decades, we will see the cane farms turn back into rainforest. These will increase biodiversity and decrease runoff. The decreased runoff will help keep our beaches clean. So those cane farms that will be redeveloped will still be well under flood level if nothing is done. In order to counter this, we can dig a large hole in a corner of the cane farm and use the earth from that to raise the overall level of the cane farms for the houses. We can then call this hole a storm water draining unit. Even after this, we'll still have the problem of the earth being acidic, as earth, when it is disturbed, becomes acidic. To counter this, we can import large amounts of lime to neutralize the acidity of the earth. In order to encourage the new owners of these cane farms, a new law must be enforced, which states that for every certain amount of land bought, a percentage must be given back to nature. This will be coincided with an obligation to help rainforest revegetation in these lands. In order to protect our pristine beaches, I recommend moving away from the large sewage treatment plants, which have a tendency to discharge large amounts of treated sewage directly into our waterways, and recommend using on-site sewage treatment. By this I mean treatment of sewage on your own domestic property. There are several ways of doing this. One way is to release secondary treated effluents directly into the jungle. These nutrients are going to encourage growth of the jungle and foster biodiversity. You can also dispose of home-treated sewage by feeding fish. The main problem with these big metropolitan sewage treatment plants is that when flash flooding occurs, they tend to release raw sewage into our waterways. In some ultra-high density living areas, personal sewage treatment facilities may be impractical. In these scenarios, we may choose to use small communal sewage treatment plants, which will be much smaller than the big metropolitan ones, but will still act as efficiently as residential sewage treatment facilities. They are also not prone to flash flooding, and you can dispose of the excrement in your garden.